Out of all the albums I've tried to write about or describe this year, this may just be the most difficult, mainly because its approach to being music is completely outside of what we consider musical. In fact, in order to really describe this album, I'd need to describe to you another one, made by one of these three legendary electronic music composers, in particular Ryoji Ikeda. The album in question is called Dataplex. The approaches of Ikeda to constructing soundscapes are minimal and nearly silent. The sounds used are as raw and untampered as they get, but it's how Ryoji constructs patterns out of these noises that really impresses me. Synthetic, calculated, robotic, inhuman. Yeah, these are all words that you could use, but that may just be the appeal, being drafted into such a bleak, empty space that eventually blows up into something of a magnificent drone piece at the end, which I find to be a seriously clever way of making these minimal sounds lead somewhere, actually giving the album a narrative. At times the atmosphere is uncomfortable, and at times just the sounds themselves are physically uncomfortable to listen to. But what Ikeda is able to do on Dataplex is temper these sounds into something with a bit more form to them. It's music and rhythm and ambience in the most minimal way. On that note, Dataplex as an album is a great reference point for this grand collaboration here, as Alva, Noto and Mika Vainio are also accomplished electronic musicians specializing in ambient, drone and noise music, and with all of that in mind, Live 2002 is a perfect or near perfect match for all the respective styles. Our result is Ikeda's minimal sounds that sputter into prickly, subtle grooves as if metallic fingers are tapping the inside of your skull, and indeed they are actual grooves. What initially seems like grating modular tones is actually the basis of a really catchy techno groove if you actually hone into the way that these textures shape up like steel shavings around a magnet. But what Noto and Vainio bring elevate this album to the higher level, and those are the heavy, crackly, overwhelming drones that coat the back of these soundscapes, anxious in atmosphere but simple in tone. I might liken them to the ambient sound inside an airplane as it begins to take off. Sometimes these drones are manipulated to sound as if the whole track is falling apart slowly, piece by piece, but whatever happens, it's meant to be constantly overloading you with sensors. At times this album does its best to emulate white noise inside a silent room. As a matter of fact, Live 2002 uses silence to its own advantage. With sound so minimal, it's interesting to note that silence itself is being used as its own instrument. These tracks throughout the album are constantly keeping me on edge, despite how little and microscopic the sound design is. The compositions sound gigantic, or at least speak to that level, especially by the time Movement 11 comes around. It's only upon that final track where everything that the album had to offer before it clumps together and crashes down in a crushing, earth-shattering blow. Despite how inhuman and atonal this album intends on remaining throughout its runtime, Movement 11 is the moment where we genuinely feel fucking scared. It's an apocalyptic beast of an ending that comes around so unsuspectingly it's as if it was right next to you the entire time. I don't expect everyone who gives this album a go to love it, let alone to the extent that I did, but I feel like it's such a great reminder of how creative and ambitious you can get with even the most minimal and flat-out unusual sounds that no one would ever think to play with, and then manages to create emotions in an atmosphere and even a bit of a story on its own, even though it's literally not saying a single word. For that reason, my verdict on this album is a very strong 9 out of 10.